On the 2nd of June 2015, a terrible accident occurred on the Alton Towers record-breaking roller coaster, the Smiler, which left many riders seriously injured as a result. Today we're going to break down the Smiler accident from the judge's verdict, report information about the accident, whether the actual ride itself was at fault, and my opinions on the whole outcome. I just want to highlight that this video isn't created to place blame anywhere. It's purely for informational purposes, as most YouTube videos don't give the full account of what actually happened in the moments prior to the accident. I wanted to make this video because I've noticed that when I started my YouTube channel, every time I posted a video of the Smiler, I'd get comments like, "You shouldn't be posting this. That ride should be closed," and referencing those that were affected by the crash. This kind of shocked me a bit, as I didn't realise just how negative an impact the accident had on some of the general public around the Smiler roller coaster itself. I just kind of thought of it as a tragic accident, lessons had been learned and the public had moved on, but clearly the media surrounding this accident had a bigger effect on people than I appreciated. I also decided I wanted to do a video on the Smiler crash to explain it from an in-depth factual perspective other than the media, which, let's face it, manipulate us at any chance they get. Blackpool Tower springs to mind.
Return to that breaking news now, and this is about firefighters being called to a blaze at the Blackpool Tower.
This has really all kicked off this afternoon around 2:15, and quite significant flames. I think you were saying it the last time that we were talking about this, when we thought it might have just been a little bit of smoke, but when some of the footage that we've seen on social media, the flames are coming out of the windows.
Yeah, it's actually both sides, exactly.
Blackpool Tower, a huge...
I just want to make it clear that the opinions in this video are my own, and everyone is entitled to have their own interpretation of the accident so long as it's based on actual facts. I do want to stress that everyone is allowed to have their own opinion, and I don't want the comments section to be a place of negativity, as there's honestly been enough of that. The information in this video is directly taken from the sentencing remarks and factual report of the HSE court case, which are available on the internet for public viewing. Viewer discretion is advised, as I will share the CCTV footage associated with the accident. However, I won't be sharing any other material from that day. What is the Smiler? So, as a bit of background to the ride itself, the Smiler roller coaster was opened in May 2013 at Alton Towers in Staffordshire, UK. It's a multi-loop steel roller coaster manufactured by Gerstlauer, holding the world record for most inversions at 14, taking the record from Colossus at Thorpe Park, which is also in the UK. It's designed to have up to 5 trains, each with up to 16 passengers in 4 rows of 4. Remember that this doesn't mean 5 trains will always be on the track. Trains will be taken away and added in response to how busy the park is. The Smiler is themed to a correctional facility known as the Ministry of Joy, whose mission is to forge a smile on the faces of all of its riders by a process called marmalisation. The roller coaster track goes between a large robotic-themed machine called the Marmalizer, which uses methods such as hypnotic spinning wheels, flashing lights, and laughing gas, which is just water spray, to achieve this correction. Since the accident, references to the Marmalizer appear to have disappeared, and considering the definition of that word, I think it was a respectful thing to do. In accordance with the relevant standards for roller coaster rides, the ride employs a block zone system enabling several trains to be in operation on the ride at the same time, with an automatic intended fail-safe system governed by the ride's PLC, or the ride's brain. This was designed to keep the trains separate, specifically to prevent collisions. In normal operating mode, once the train is being dispatched from the station building, it will automatically advance from block to block under the PLC's monitoring system until it has completed the circuit. If a train attempts to enter a block that is occupied by another train, the system initiates a block stop which halts the trains behind the stopped train. If the system shows a fault, the operators were required to contact the maintenance engineers. They would attend and put the system into maintenance mode, which would enable them to override the system and take control. Once the fault was rectified, the engineers would send a train around the system to check that it was clear and then reset it to enable normal mode to resume. Please take note of what is said here. The engineers would put the system into maintenance mode and send a train around the track. The day of the accident. In my opinion, the accident can be explained using the Swiss cheese model of accident causation, which demonstrates how generally a failure cannot be traced back to a single root cause, but that accidents are often the result of a combination of factors, and I believe this is ultimately why Merlin is a business. We're blamed for the accident by the courts and not individuals. In a brief summary, on the day of the crash, an unoccupied train had valleyed or stalled in the bottom of one of the loops known as the Cobra Roll in a free fall section of the track called the Pit. The ride's PLC did what it was programmed to do to safeguard the ride and halted the trains behind the stalled train in safe positions, i.e. block zones. This was overridden by humans and the crash occurred. I'll explain the sequence of events according to the notes from the actual court case involving the HSE. The Smilers PLC detected high winds and shut down as a result, although I have read a slightly different story in another report. Engineers arrived and as part of the procedure to clear the fault, they sent a train around the track. This train did not make it to the second lift hill. A second engineering team arrived at the Smiler and the train was required to be moved manually, which I believe to be a key point in the chain of events as employees had already dealt with a stalled train shortly before the second valleyed train. Gerstlauer's operating instructions stated that the ride must be shut down if wind force 7 is reached, which is 34 miles per hour. Wind speeds on the day were recorded to be approximately 45 miles per hour and the Sky Ride had been closed as a result of these high winds. During the operation to move this train toward the second lift hill, the original team of engineers took the opportunity to introduce an extra fifth train onto the ride, but didn't communicate effectively with the rest of the operations and engineering team to ensure that they knew and understood this. In my opinion, I do believe this to be the significant turning point in the chain reaction of this horrible accident. Meanwhile, the first stalled train eventually completed the circuit after being moved manually to the second lift hill. Another empty train was sent out to test the track, but became stuck or valleyed at a low point on the second section of track, probably for the same reason as the first train. I want to make the point that this area of the ride is clearly seen, it's not hidden from bystanders, and is clearly evident in the video I took myself of the Smiler. The operators believed that the ride was clear of trains and safe to run because they could see that all 4 trains were safely back in the station. At this point, the operators thought that 4 trains were in operation, not 5. It wasn't entirely clear to me about whether the Smiler was still in maintenance mode at this point. They proceeded to load a train with passengers and sent it on its way. The control system correctly detected that the valleyed train was still on the track and so held the passenger train at the top of the first lift hill. This is called blocking. The block reported by the control system was assumed to be false. Once again, the operators believed that only 4 trains were present and they knew the whereabouts of all of them, so started the procedure to override the safety system and remove the block. According to the reports, they also assumed that the fault was the same as the first fault. However, it was a completely different fault produced by the Smilers PLC that required different protocols. A CCTV camera was available which showed the empty train stuck in the middle of section 2 of the track. This camera was either not checked or the valleyed train was not noticed during the check. The control room operator therefore authorised clearing of the block. An additional layer of protection was in place in the form of a button in the field which also had to be pressed to reset the block. This involved a person actually leaving the Smiler control cabin, making their way to the bottom of lift number 2 and performing the reset, before making their way back to the control cabin. Before pressing the button, the operator did not physically check the whole of the second section of track. because they were already satisfied that all 4 trains were accounted for. The passenger train was therefore released from the top of lift 1 and collided with the empty stationary train on section 2 of the track, seriously injuring many passengers. An expert in the investigation assessed the kinetic energy as being equivalent to a family car of 1.5 tonnes colliding at 90 miles per hour. The report also states that most of the track was covered by CCTV cameras which displayed in the control room. Had they checked, the engineers would have seen the valid stationary train. However, there were points made in the reports that the CCTV cameras were not clear enough. The court verdict. Although human error was certainly an important factor, the judge principally blamed the park's management for the incident because they didn't have a suitable and sufficient risk assessment in place, particularly with respect to engineering, maintenance, operations. There was no structured and effective, safe system of work to deal with faults, including the resetting of the roller coaster after a stoppage. They had not properly trained their engineering staff in the procedures to be followed when dealing with a zone stop fault. And they had not devised an effective system to deal with the potential impact of wind speed on the operation of the ride. The Smiler ride itself was extensively assessed for the court case, and the findings were as follows. The Smiler underwent the normal route for commissioning and installation systems for safety of attractions in accordance with HSG 175. Please don't ask me what this entails. No evidence was found that the track itself was defective. There was no evidence to indicate that the trains themselves were defective or improper. In respect of the Smiler's ride programme functionality, the feedback from HRCell's specialists indicated that the ride programme, PLC and sensors appeared to be functioning satisfactorily and in line with expectant standards, i.e. it did what it was supposed to do prior to the manual intervention of the ride engineers. There was no evidence that the roller coaster's control system had malfunctioned. It was suggested that the CCTV camera footage was a bit unclear, but in my opinion is a subjective point. The manufacturer and roller coaster itself were not found to be at fault in a court of law. Merlin Attractions Operations Limited did accept fault prior to the judgment, and I want to highlight from the report that it was said they did take full and extensive steps to remedy the problem brought out by the investigation. It was also accepted by the court that there had been an exceptional level of cooperation with the investigation from them. It was also accepted that the company did generally have a good health and safety record and procedures in place, particularly given its size. Alton Towers were fined $5 million plus costs for breaches of the Health and Safety at Work Act, i.e. for failing to ensure that visitors were not exposed to material risks to their health and safety. This didn't include compensation to those affected, which were dealt with in a separate case. The video on YouTube I watched really annoyed me because it seems to be a British thing to do to assume all business people are greedy. Let me tell you that running a business and being responsible for the safety of a significant amount of people is a big, massive deal. Greed doesn't even come into it, like was suggested in that video, because without customer trust and satisfaction, they don't have a long-term successful and profitable business. I also want to point out that the figures used in the report were turnover. This figure of 385 million in 2015, for example, excludes all operating expenses, employee salaries, for example, and it's inaccurate for the judge to make the comment that based upon the turnover, the business is highly profitable. Any business person knows that this isn't always true, and you only have to watch Dragon's Den to understand that. Merlin carried out their own internal investigation and concluded a ride shutdown message was misunderstood by staff at the ride. This led to a decision to manually restart the ride, overriding the control system without appropriate safety protocols being followed correctly. The judge rejected the in-house finding in his opening statement, saying human error was not the cause as was suggested by the defendant in an early press release. The underlying fault was an absence of a structured and considered system, not that of individual efforts doing their best within a flawed system. They were fined as a result in the sum of $5 million to be paid to the HSE. There was a separate case for the victims. So what are my thoughts? It's my personal opinion that Merlin should not have had all the blame placed on their shoulders, but with reference to the Swiss cheese model described at the beginning of my video, I understand why they were blamed. It's a real problem highlighted most in aviation that automation has become the human Achilles heel, as we become too reliant and too complacent on automation to the point we lose the fundamental and underlying skills required to carry out the job in a more manual fashion when required. Had an employee simply gone to look at the track with their own eyes before hitting the red override button, which they had to go outside to do, they would have seen the valid train. The bottom of the Cobra roll is extremely clear to see from the exit of the ride station. You only need to look at Air France Flight 447 to understand just how reliant we are on automation. Blocked pitot tubes providing false information to the autopilot resulted in pilots becoming disorientated despite the plane flying perfectly normally, only to end up in the ocean as a result. I've watched so many air crash investigations which highlight this issue with automation time and time again, and I personally believe the Smiler accident was a result of something very similar, as it appears to me that not once did anyone think to take a step back, take a breather, and simply go and have a look at the ride itself before overriding the advanced, accurate safety systems put in place for a reason. As a scientist who's spent a lot of time in a professional role, it's almost assumed by employers that I have a certain level of skill sets, such as attention to detail and ability to communicate, as well as a few science-based specific skills. Employees at Alton Towers and at any level should most definitely have the ability to communicate without training when necessary, and I believe the addition of the fifth train without effectively communicating this to the operations team was the significant turning point in this story, as I've said earlier. You shouldn't really have to write down in a risk assessment to communicate with your fellow employees. Although good quality standard operating procedures, risk assessments and good leadership should be an essential part of overall ride safety, which according to reports in the HSE court case appeared to be lacking. It blows my brain to read in the report that engineers on the day of the accident did not seem to have any formal training, seen any written procedures, risk assessments or been signed off regarding how to go about a block reset. But it equally blows my brain that employees didn't feel the need to raise this as a concern. There have been many a time where I've been pushed into using extremely expensive equipment when I've not received formal training. I've always stood up to those in leadership roles and told them what I required to carry out the role in a safe manner. Maybe that's just me and my own personality though. I generally won't do anything in my job that makes me uncomfortable from a training skill set perspective. I do believe that the Smiler accident taught the industry a very difficult lesson, that you may be more likely to have an accident on the way to a theme park than to be injured at the park itself, but without thorough standard operating procedures, risk assessments, training, good management, leadership, communication and a well-built machine, accidents do, can and will happen. There is one thing the report stated in certainty, however, and that is the Smiler roller coaster and manufacturer were not responsible for the accident, and the ride performed exactly as it was designed to do on the day of the accident. For those people that state the roller coaster should have been shut down after the accident, I've never understood this reasoning, particularly when there are severe and life-changing accidents on the roads every single day caused by vehicles, yet there isn't an outcry to ban all motor vehicles. In aviation, when there are accidents, it quite regularly involves a large loss of life. Japan Airlines 123 with a death count of 520 is an example of this. I've been a victim of botched surgery, which has left me permanently disabled for the rest of my life. The surgeon was well respected and experienced in his field, yet he made a mistake with me. Does this mean he should have lost his job? What about the horrendous post office scandal resulting in so many people's lives ruined after being falsely accused of stealing? Do we need to shut down the post office? The problem with the Smiler accident was that it was rare. The ride itself has a dark theme, and the media blew it up and fed off it as much as they could to frighten the general public without putting it into context for their own financial gain. The extensive investigations concluded that the Smiler roller coaster was perfectly safe and that the insufficient paperwork and training put in place to operate the ride were ultimately the cause of the accident. Although it is my personal opinion after reading the reports that human error did still have a significant role to play in this accident. It really was a tragic accident, and I don't think any amount of compensation can overcome the loss of a limb. It was really comforting to listen to interviews and understanding that the victims were very satisfied with how Merlin supported them during such a horrible time. Finally, all we can do in life is learn from mistakes that are made and make sure they never happen ever again.